You've probably heard of a lot of really popular frameworks such as React and Angular that are used to write front-end web applications. These frameworks are really powerful in that as a developer, it makes it much easier to understand and control compared to trying to write something with like jQuery or vanilla JavaScript. One of the problems you run into when you're using one of these frameworks, though, is that it creates a very large, bloated application, and at the same time, because of the way that it's handling things such as a virtual DOM, it gets really slow inside of the browser. Today we're going to look at Svelte. Svelte looks to solve some of these problems, such as the bloated application and the performance hit you take when React and Angular are doing all this work inside of the browser. Svelte will do this by taking our application and compiling it directly into JavaScript that will run in the browser that knows what needs to happen and doesn't have to do all the calculations and computations that something like React would have to do in the browser. We're going to make a simple to-do application using Svelte. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but it should give you a good idea of the layout of Svelte and how things feel in it. Personally, I really like it. I just started using it a couple weeks ago. If you want to, there's a REPL on the Svelte website that will allow you to follow along. I'm going to use Visual Studio Code and run a local dev environment. I've opened up Visual Studio Code. I've also went ahead and popped the browser here to the right. Before we get started, I want to note that I have an extension installed for Svelte from the extension marketplace that enables Svelte syntax highlighting. It'll make it much easier to read the Svelte code when we start developing. Go ahead and open up a command prompt to the directory that you'd like to have your project in. Next, we're going to use npx-deget to get our project initialized. Once the project is created, we should then be able to move into the created directory. And next, we want to install all the dependencies we need from npm. So let's go ahead and do that. After the npm installation is complete, let's go ahead and start our Svelte server. So to do this, we'll go ahead and say npm run dev. You'll see that it says here in the window, your application is ready on localhost 5000. So let's go ahead and go there in our browser. So you can see here that our Svelte application is running. Next, I'm going to go ahead and open Svelte in my Visual Studio Code. Once you have your application open in your IDE, I just want to take note of a couple files here. You'll notice we have our standard package.json that has our dependencies, such as Svelte, and then some other roll-up dependencies that Svelte depends on to host our application locally. You'll also notice in our scripts up here, we have a couple of different scripts. We're running dev mode right now because we're in live dev, but if you want it to go to production, you could run it with the build, and that would take the Svelte and compile it down into minified JavaScript. Outside of that, we have a rollup.config.js that's used to config a bunch of different things inside of Svelte. We're not going to get into it for the purposes of this video, but for your information, I want you to know that it is here. Next, let's move into our source directory and start to get an idea of how the Svelte application is laid out. You'll notice here that we have a main.js. Let's go ahead and open that. So inside of our main.js, you'll see that we have an app being imported from app.svelte. You can see that our app.svelte file is here. So if we go in here, we have a bunch of Svelte code. This is what Svelte code looks like. We'll get more into that in just a second. But back here inside of main.js, we pull inside of app and then we instantiate it. We tell it where we want it to instantiate on the body of the document. That's the target. And then we also are able to pass in props to this. You'll see props, name, hello world. So if we go back here inside of app.svelte, you'll see that that prop is ultimately being used here. If we go back inside of main.js and use this and change this name to something like fish and then save, it'll detect the changes and ultimately populate the changes back over here on localhost 5000. Let's look back here in app.svelte and give you an idea of how code is laid out inside of Svelte. So kind of like how in something like React you would have a component, Svelte has a somewhat similar concept going on. Reminds me more of traditional HTML. You see here that we have a style tag, and that is where you'd put all your CSS. Then we have our actual HTML markup, and then last but not least, our script up at the top, that allows us to really control and manipulate our applications and make it reactive, similar to how we would write code inside of something like React. So before we get started here, I kind of want to start with a blank slate. So let's go ahead and remove all of this. And then back inside of main.js, that prop that was getting passed down of name, we're going to go ahead and get rid of that because we're not going to want that for our application. Let's continue now and start creating our to-do list application. The first thing I want to do is introduce you to our backing data model inside of app.svelte. So we want to have something that looks kind of like this. If you look here, we have an array of to-dos that I've created, and each to-do has a description. So what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and use Svelte to output these to-dos to the browser. If we wanted to, we could do something that looks a little bit like this. You see that we get our description off our to-dos out in the browser. Now, watching this video, you're probably familiar with programming concepts, and you know this just is not sustainable because the length of to-dos can grow over time or shrink over time. What we're looking for is a way to loop through the to-dos. Inside of Svelte, we use an each. So let's go ahead and transition from the to-dos using direct array access into using an each to display the to-dos. So first, I'm going to go ahead and pop a div here, and that div is going to be my to-do divs. Then I'm going to go ahead and start our each. So we're going to say curly brace pound each. And then we're going to say to-dos as to-do. And then down here, we're going to end this. To end that, we're going to say slash each inside of curly braces like that. So this says, with line 11, we're saying, let's go ahead and start a to-do each. And then with line 12, we're saying, okay, we're at the end. So we can put our content, our display stuff for our to-dos inside of this each. So let's go ahead and do a basic div for now. And we're going to say to-do.description. Save that. And so you can see it has a similar effect. We're now displaying it more in a block format because we have this div here. But if you can see here, this is the basic gist of what's going to happen here. So we've got our to-dos inside of an array, and then we're looping through them. Now that we've got our to-do list populating out here, ideally we wouldn't want to have to write all the to-do code inside of app.svelte. We'd want to have something separate to handle that. So we're going to introduce a component to handle that. So we'll come back over here and say new file, and we're going to say to-do.svelte. If you haven't picked up on it, all Svelte files have the .svelte extension. So this is a good time to kind of reinforce what Svelte expects. Let's have a script tag. Let's have a style tag. And then down here is where our markup would go. So let's go ahead and introduce our markup. We're going to have a div with to-do item as a class. Inside of this div, we want to have an input. That's a checkbox. We're not really worried about the name and the ID right now. Then we want to have a div for our description. And then last but not least, we want to have a button that allows us to remove our item eventually. So you might notice that my Visual Studio Code's not happy with me right now. You see this little yellow squiggly below the description. That means it's not happy about something. It says description's not defined. And that makes sense because we haven't told Svelte about description yet. Description's going to be a prompt that's passed down from app.svelte. Up here in script, we need to create a description prop. So if you notice, I went ahead and added a text string here. You don't have to do that. That is how you give a prop a default value. So now you'll see that our yellow squiggly has gone away. So we have our to-do component started. It's not by any means complete, but we should be able to at least take app.svelte and loop through, and instead of doing it the way we're doing it right now, we'll be able to use to-do.svelte to display the to-do items instead of displaying it directly inline inside of the div like we're doing right now. So let's go ahead and do that. Go back here to app.svelte, and we want to replace this div with to-do. But first we have to import to-do into app.svelte. So let's go ahead and do that. Come down here to where we want our to do. And just like we would do with like a React component, we can say to do, just like this. And you'll see that right now we're displaying 2 items, but it's not displaying the information that's up here inside of the to-dos array because we haven't passed down the description prop. So let's go ahead and do that. So now you see that we have our to-dos looping through and all the way down, cook dinner, take out trash. So we're taking our array, looping through it in the each, and then taking that prop and passing it down. Next, I want to go ahead and get delete button working, but in order to do that, I want to go ahead and introduce some styles here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in. If you want to pause the video and take time to enter it yourself, that's cool. I'm just going to pop it in here to my todo.svelte. So there's a view for you to go ahead and type it in. I may put it in the comments so it's easy for you to grab. You can see it's looking a little bit better now. And then back here in app.svelte, I've got some styles I want to stick in here as well. So I went ahead and added basic styles to get us going. So go ahead and get the app.svelte style as well while you're at it. You can totally follow the tutorial without having the styles. It is rather irrelevant what we're doing, but I did it just to make it look more presentable. Now, one thing I want to note about these styles that I think is really cool, one of the big problems you have when you're working on a project is you have to worry about your styles accidentally impacting a different component. Let's say you have a generic content class. You have to be very careful about that accidentally impacting different components inside your application. The nice thing about Svelte, when you make your styles at the component level like this, Svelte takes that and automatically scopes it to that component and makes it to where those styles will only apply to that particular thing you're working on. I think, in my opinion, it's probably my favorite feature of Svelte so far. So the next thing we want to do is take our delete button and make it work. And to do this, I'm going to go ahead and take our markup and I'm going to pull it up here to the top, just so that way we can get better sight on our script and our markup, because that really is the meat and potatoes of what we're doing here. So what we want to do is when the button over here is clicked, you see right now if we click it, it doesn't do anything. What we want to do when it is clicked is we want to delete that to do from the list. Now, to do this, right now we don't have anything like an index, so let's go ahead and add that. We could just use our description as a reference, but I don't like that because you could have 2 different items with the same description, so we're going to make a concept of index. And back here inside of app.svelte, let's go ahead and add that to the array. And then once we've added that as a property on the objects, we need to go ahead and pass that down to the to-do. You could pass these properties down using the spread operator, but we're not going to be doing that for now. So back over here in todo.svelte, we have index, and basically now it is complaining because index is not actually being used. So let's go ahead and work towards fixing that. So what we want to do is we want to delete this item. So let's look at this and take a small step of being able to alert out the index when the button is pressed. So on the button here, we want to go ahead and create an onClick equals and say delete clicked. And what delete click needs to be is a function. So up here inside of our script, let's go ahead and create a delete clicked function. And so what we want to do is alert our index when this happens. So if you come over here into our browser, click delete, you'll see that that happens when you click it. All right, so what's happening now is we've got this delete method that's being called, but it is only alerting index, and the knowledge that this delete happened only exists inside of todo.svelte itself, but we need to know about it back inside of app.svelte. And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to use an event dispatcher to dispatch that up to app.svelte. So let's go ahead and import create event dispatcher. And then down here, let's go ahead and create our event dispatcher for when delete is clicked. Now that we've created our dispatcher, we need to use it inside of our delete clicked method. So this alert's going to go away, and we're going to call our delete dispatcher And what we're going to do is it takes two parameters. The first parameter is kind of like a dispatcher ID. We're going to say delete clicked. And then the second parameter is a detail we want to send up. And we want to send up the index. So let's go ahead and send in the index. And save that. We've got our to-do pretty much figured out now. We created a delete dispatcher that's going to dispatch up a delete clicked event and going to pass in an event with an index detail that we need to use wherever we're using the to-do. Click now, it seems like it's not doing anything, which is not completely true. It's doing something, it's just not doing any work that's meaningful. We need to listen for this dispatcher up in app.svelte, and when we hear it, we need to remove the item from the list. So let's go ahead and do that. Up here in app.svelte on the to-do, we want to say on delete clicked equals delete to do. And you'll notice we're getting the yellow squiggly again because we haven't defined what delete to do does. So let's go ahead and create delete to do up here. So now we have delete to do created. What will happen is when delete is clicked back in the to-do.svelte, it'll dispatch up to delete to do right here, and it will call this method. What we need to do is then remove the to do with that specified index. And we need to get that index from the detail that's being passed in on the event here. Let's go ahead and filter out our to-dos. So now if we come over here into our Live Reload app, you'll notice that we can now delete elements from our to-do list. You'll notice that the event.detail reflected what we passed in over here inside of to-do.svelte. See how we passed up the index, and then the delete clicked over here aligned with what we put after on. So on delete click delete to do calls the to do, adds that object here on to the event.detail, and then we're able to get that detail back out and consume it in order to update the state of our to-do list. So we're making pretty good progress here. One thing you might notice is we're able to delete all of our to-dos, and then it just gives us an empty list. It doesn't really say, hey, you'll have anything to do. So let's go ahead and make a slight modification down here that tests whether or not we have any to-dos, and if we don't, it displays a different message. So let's go ahead and say if to-dos.length equal 0, and then we'll have an else, and then like we had to end our each, let's go down here and end our if. So notice how that ends. And now it's complaining because I have an if block with nothing in it, but we're going to fix that. And let's go ahead and take this whole thing and indent it. So here is where we want to have a div that says there's nothing to do. So now if we come back over here to our app and we start clicking delete, when we get to having nothing to do, it says there is nothing to do. So that's a little bit clearer, and it introduces you to how if works inside of Svelte. So now you know how to loop and you know how to do conditional type statements. Now let's go ahead and add a header up here that says this is my to-do list. Now that we can delete to-dos, we need a way to be able to add to-dos to our to-do list. To do this, we're going to go ahead and create a separate file called add-to-do.svelte. Like before, let's go ahead and define our script, and then our style, and then in between we'll put our markup. We're going to have a form. We're going to give that form a class of add-to-do. And before we get started here, let's go ahead and put some styles in here. And so what I need is I need two inputs. I need one input that is text, and then I need another input that is a submit input. We're going to give it a class of add button and a type of submit. Then for the value, we'll give it a plus sign. And back here on our text input, let's go ahead and give it a placeholder of create new to do. So let's go ahead. we haven't really done anything functionally here yet, but let's go ahead and get this displaying over here on the to-do list. So to do that, we're going to go back inside of app.svelte. And much like we did here, we're going to say import add to-do from. And then down here at the bottom, let's go ahead and add this. So now we have our add to do displaying inside of our web application. We can type text here, we can click plus, but it's not doing anything. Right now when we click plus, because it's on a form, it takes the page and reloads it because it's submitting the form and going nowhere. So let's go ahead and look at fixing that. Back here in add to do.svelte, so we need a internal description. Notice this is not exported, this is completely internal to add to do. And then what we need to do is we need description to be bound down here to the input for the text. So we're going to say bind value equals description. This will create a two-way binding between description and value on the text. We also need to tell the form what to do on submit. And once we've done that, we need to create that function up here. Let's go ahead and take in the event. And then let's go ahead and prevent default, which will prevent the form from submitting like it is right now. And let's go ahead and alert what the description is to confirm that is working. If you come over here into the web application, you can now type in some type of value and you'll see that it is in fact working. We have the internal state of add to do working. We now need a way to pass it up to app.svelte. And to do that, we're going to do much like we did inside of to do with the delete button. We're going to create a dispatcher and then dispatch that a to do needs to be added up to app.svelte. So let's go ahead and do that. So first we need to import the event dispatcher. And then let's create our dispatcher. Now we need to invoke our dispatcher. We're going to give it an ID of add to do. And then we are going to give it the description that will come out on the event.detail. So at this point, everything inside of add to do should be finished. We just now need to finish up inside of app.svelte listening to this. And then once we hear from it, we need to make the addition to the to-do list. Come back in here inside of app.svelte and say on add to do equals add to do. And then up here we need to define our add to do function. So now we need to set our to-do's value with the new value. So we're going to say this to-dos, and then we're going to have a new to-do that we haven't created yet. So let's create our new to-do and give it a description that is equal to event.detail.description. Now we need to give it an index that can be to-dos.length. Go ahead and save that and let's verify that it works. Come over here and try to add a to-do. We will see that it very much so works. So now we have the ability to add items. We have the ability to delete items. We haven't really looked at being able to mark our to-do list items completed. So let's take a look at doing that. So we can come over here and we can mark our to-do list item completed. There will be some weirdness right now with what's going on and how Svelte is handling things. So let's go ahead and delete the cooked dinner. Now that I've deleted cooked dinner, you'll see that take out trash is now marked completed, which is quite odd, and it has to do with the way that Svelte is handling things. Svelte doesn't really care about the order of things unless you tell it to. It needs to know a key to go with what is happening down here inside of this each. So let's go ahead and tell it we want the to-dos index to be our key. So now if we come back here, we select cook dinner and delete it, you'll notice that it is now behaving like we want it to. This creates a problem though, because up here inside of the to-do list, there's a chance that to-dos.length could be the same length, and you could ultimately end up with two things with the exact same index. Svelte will not like it when you add something with the same index twice. So if you were to add and delete, it would get really unhappy. We can take a look at that. you'll see that it's no longer letting us add stuff. Well, if we open up the inspect here, cannot have duplicate keys and a keyed each. Even though we've deleted the item that was keyed, Swelte's still not happy. So what we need to do is come back up here and let's introduce a concept of new index. So let new index equal 0. Set our index here, and then +1 new index ++, and then down here inside of add to do, we want to do the same thing with the index. So now you'll see that we've deleted stuff, but Svelte will now let us add it back. So that's pretty much all that I wanted to cover in this video. It was a basic crash course in creating a to-do list inside of Svelte. I would challenge you to take this and add the ability to support sorting by completed items. Right now, the checkbox is kind of dumb. It's not actually changing our state of our to-do list. So you would need to add a completed property and would need to have a way for that to be updated. That's beyond what we're doing here, and it's a good challenge for you to get more familiar with Svelte. So you would have like a button here, you would click completed, and it would hide everything except for the items that were completed or not completed. So that would be a good next step in getting more familiar with Svelte. Outside of that, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm looking at making more content about other subjects, Svelte being one of them. And just let me know if you have any questions.